then click Done. If you're having any problems or if you have questions with the interpretation, please use the chat or your mic to ask for help. Nuevamente bienvenidos al webinario del día de hoy. Durante esta reunión vamos a tener interpretación en inglés, español y en tagalog. Nuestros intérpretes son Génesis, Viva y Roger. Nuestros oradores hablarán en inglés, español y en tagalog. Todo el mundo tiene que seleccionar un canal de idioma y escuchar la interpretación a menos que domine los 3 idiomas. Si se conectó por ordenador, puede hacerlo haciendo clic en el icono del globo etiquetado en interpretación que se encuentra en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom y seleccionando el idioma que prefiere escuchar. Si está utilizando la aplicación de Zoom por teléfono móvil, seleccione los 3 puntos etiquetados más, luego seleccione interpretación de idiomas y el idioma que prefiere y quiera escuchar, y luego presione finalizado. Si tiene alguna pregunta o tiene problemas con la interpretación, por favor mándenos un mensaje en el chat o use su micrófono para pedir ayuda. And now our Tagalog interpreter will give the announcement in Tagalog. Ahora nuestra intérprete de Tagalog dará el anuncio en Tagalog.
Hello, magandang gabi. Ako si Viva at ako ang mag-i-interpret sa Tagalog. Sa araw na ito, mayroon tayong sumasabay na pagsalin sa wikang Ingles, Kastila at Tagalog. Ang ating mga tagapagsalin ay sina Viva at Roger. Ang ating mga mananalita ay magsasalita sa wikang Ingles, Kastila at Tagalog. Dapat pumili ng ang lahat ng channel upang pakinggan ang tamang wikang sinasalin, liban lamang kung bihasa sila anuman sa mga wikang nagtatanghal. Kung tayo ay nasa computer, pwede niyong gawin ito sa pag-click ng globe na icon na nakalagay sa interpretasyon sa ibaba ng inyong Zoom screen at piliin ang wika na ibig ninyong pakinggan. Kung kayo ay nasa telepono, piliin yung 3 dot na more, tapos piliin ang language interpretation at yung wika na inyong nauunawaan, tapos i-click ang done. Kung mayroon kang mga tanong o problema sa interpretasyon, gumamit ng chat o gamitin ang iyong microphone upang humingi ng tulong. Ngayon ay magbibigay kami ng huling gabay sa isang wika lamang, kaya't pumili kayo ng inyong mga language channel.
And now we will go over some guidelines for today. If you can switch, thank you. So please speak one person at a time. Hand signals for speaking too fast and too slowly will be used if necessary. For bilingual folks, please feel free to switch languages, and we actually encourage you to speak in the non-dominant language. But please don't switch languages in the middle of one sentence. Hablen una persona a la vez. Utilicen señales de mano si alguien está hablando demasiado rápido o demasiado bajito. Para las personas que son bilingües, pueden cambiar de lenguaje y les animamos a que hablen en el lenguaje que no es su idioma dominante. Pero por favor, no cambien de lenguaje en medio de una frase. If we can switch to the next slide, please. The language a conversation is happening in can switch at any moment. Choose the language channel that you want to hear the content in. If there's any technical trouble, please don't suffer in silence. Message our tech person. And for today, our tech person will be Dylan. You can choose to turn off the original language and just hear interpretation on your language channel. El lenguaje en que conversamos puede cambiar en cualquier momento. Seleccione el canal de lenguaje que quiere oír. Si tienen problemas tecnológicos, por favor, diga algo. Mande un mensaje a la persona encargada de la tecnología. En el día de hoy será Dylan. Puede elegir apagar el sonido del lenguaje original y solo oír la interpretación en su canal.
All right, thank you, Grace and Viva, for setting us up. If you haven't yet already, choose a language channel. And we will get that set up, actually. Give us a few minutes. Few moments. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone so much for tuning in tonight. Welcome to our July educational webinar, Migrants Against Neoliberalism and APEC, hosted by the Pacific Northwest People Over Profit Coalition and the International Migrants Alliance USA chapter. All right. I want to give a special shout out for those tuning in all up and down the West Coast, those tuning in from the East Coast, in the Southwest, and those tuning in internationally. We are so excited and honored to have you join us tonight. My name is Adrienne. I am a national coordinator and organizer of the International Migrants Alliance, and we are proud to be a member of the Pacific Northwest People Over Profit Coalition. These are our learning objectives for tonight. To understand the impacts of neoliberal globalization and forced migration, to deepen our understanding on how forums such as APEC impact migrant workers, to learn directly from migrant organizers on the ground and the impacts of neoliberalism and APEC and the ways that migrants are organizing to fight back. We are going to break down all of these words for all of us tonight. A little bit about why we are here today. Like I said, I'm an organizer with the International Migrants Alliance. We put together the educational webinar tonight, and we are the first ever global alliance of organizations of grassroots migrants, refugees, and displaced peoples. We are an alliance by and for migrants. We are 175 members strong in 35 countries around the world, organizing and fighting for our rights, our welfare, and our dignity, linking our struggles at home and overseas, and building migrant worker solidarity, international solidarity. But we, as IMA US, we are members of the Pacific Northwest People Over Profit Coalition, which is a coalition of organizations, labor groups, alliances that are committed to confronting the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, as we will refer to it, that is coming to have meetings this August in Seattle. And, you know, a lot of these high-level meetings by trade ministers are happening behind closed doors. And so it's important to us as a people-led coalition that the demands, our demands, are worker-centered, climate-friendly, are front and center. And we want to expose how a lot of the conversations don't include us. But we want to counter that and make sure that our demands are front and center. So there's no way that they can ignore the things that they're talking about affect our daily lives. So to learn more about our coalition, check out our beautiful website, PNW POP-pop.com to learn more. But if you're interested, if you're tuning in at a watch party, any number of organizers can get you connected for the ways that we are organizing ourselves and getting ready for August. We have a full program today. We are going to jump right in with a neoliberalism and forced migration introduction crash course led by our education committee. And then we're going to hear from local organizers, from international organizers. We are welcoming Nerissa Roque with Migrante Los Angeles. And then we will hear from Manuel Hidalgo with Miredes International, an organizer based in Chile. And then we will have some next steps, other ways that you can get involved. And we will leave the room open for Q&A and discussion if folks have questions for our presenters tonight. But if you're tuning into a watch party, there's also some discussion and questions that can happen simultaneously. And that will bring us to the end of our program tonight. So thank you all again for joining us, and we will jump right in. I'm going to pass it to the next facilitator, Terry, to bring us into our crash course.
Thank you, Adrienne, and good to see everyone. We have 70 plus people on with us tonight. Tonight, we have the opportunity to share a workshop that has been developed with IMA globally. It's a 6-7 hour ED that we tried to condense in about 20 minutes tonight. So you're getting a sneak peek of the full ED that we hope to be able to do, educational discussion that we hope to be able to do with you all fully in the future. So just an introduction tonight. If you go to the next slide. So here's the outline. It's in 3 sections. I will do the first.
On Sunday, right?
Saturday.
Yeah, on Sunday. Saturday?
Somebody mute there. All right. First, I will do the first and the third section, and Ben is going to do the second section. So the outline is that we do a brief history of international migration. Tonight will be very brief. And then we go into what is neoliberal globalization and its relationship to forced migration. And then the third or last part is on migrants' resistance to neoliberal globalization, including free trade agreements like APEC. So we're happy to provide this tonight and as part of the webinar series. So we can go to the next slide. This is a very, very brief history of how migration in the modern era has its roots in colonialism. So with the colonial plunder of regions outside of Europe that set the conditions for the long-term underdevelopment of the global South. So countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America. There was colonial plunder of regions outside of Europe. The wealth accumulated by European colonizers through the theft of land, through slavery and labor exploitation provided the initial capital for investment in emerging capitalist industries. So we're talking about the development of capitalism and its link to the history of colonialism. So the dispossessed populations, including slaves and forced migrants, provided some of the labor for capitalist industrialization. So from the early days of the colonial period, people were being displaced, including slaves that were taken out of their homelands and forced migrants who were dispossessed of their land. And so this migrant labor was instrumental to the birth and development of capitalism. There's a deeper and longer history we will talk about in the longer version of the education, talking about the development of capitalism and how migrant labor is linked to that, and how capitalism really developed into the latter stages where, really industries grew under capitalism, and how monopoly capitalism, where some of the most powerful industries and banks like the World Bank developed. So we won't go deep into that whole history, but in the early development of capitalism, migration and forced migration and migrant labor was a major factor there. So we go to the next slide. It just summarizes in this next slide some of the key points of that history, that labor migration and the exploitation of migrants have been integral to the birth and development of capitalism, like I mentioned. And there are four major drivers of forced migration in this development. So labor demands for capitalist development. So the demand for labor in the development of industries and capitalism. The impoverishment of colonies and neo-colonies really forced people to also migrate out of those colonies and neo-colonies. C, imperialist wars, the development of really wars as an integral part of the development of capitalism and imperialism, which again, we'll talk about more deeply in the full ED, but these contending powers around the world trying to take control of markets, take control of land, were waging wars against each other. And this is another major factor driving forced migration. The fourth one was natural disasters and environmental destruction that was hand in hand with the development of capitalism, and as mentioned here, made worse by imperialist plunder. At the latter and highest stages of capitalism, where imperialist countries are across the world vying for control of markets and resources and land, there is also natural disasters and environmental destruction that also force people to migrate. So the capitalists and the states that are supporting capitalist industries have always used legal and other forms of discrimination against new migrants as a form of labor control and a way to extract more profits for themselves. So migrants and workers pushed around the world, and the discrimination of those migrants and workers was a factor in one, controlling labor in the different countries where they were migrating, and two, drawing more profit for the owners of the capitalist industries. And this has become more extreme in the period of neoliberal globalization, this last portion that we're talking about from the 1970s onwards. So that's a brief historical overview. We go much deeper into that in the full study, but I just wanted to share the development of capitalism to this stage of imperialism and neoliberal globalization that Ben will talk more about. Migration and forced migration was a major factor along the way. So if we can go to the next slide, I think I pass it here to Ben.
Thanks, Terry. Yeah, huge thanks to all our interpreters, and hi to all of our comrades calling in right now. Really awesome to see so many of you here. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to try to define the term of neoliberal globalization in a way that is accessible to us. I think a lot of the times we poke at these big concepts and it can seem inaccessible, but for us who are organizing for migrant rights, it's so important that we know how to talk about these issues in a way that is accessible for our communities. And so neoliberal globalization is what I'll define. I'll talk about how neoliberal globalization affects countries in the global south and how neoliberal globalization affects countries in the global north, talking about who is profiting from these economic policies, and then talking about how the state and international institutions and different economic powers support neoliberal globalization. Next slide, please. So specifically, as Terry mentioned, I'm taking these two little columns we see in the middle of this infographic right here. In the 1970s, there was a profitability crisis. Oh yeah, thanks, A. You can just fill in all the text for each slide as they pop up. Thank you, that's really helpful. There was a profitability crisis in the 1970s that then capitalism as the dominant economic power in the world had to compensate for. So there's all these contradictions of capitalism that are resulting in decreased profits for the capitalist class. And so then we see a concerted effort by economic powers to create compensation that can prolong the existence of capitalism. So that being this recovery period we're looking at in the 80s, being the neoliberal recovery period, which is created by this two-pronged thing, globalization and neoliberalism, or neoliberal globalization. Next slide, please. So first, defining globalization. So this infographic here on the right is an example of contemporary globalization of the economic system. We're seeing the example being iPhones. So Apple is based in California, but uses products that are created and manufactured all over the world. So we see South Korea, United States, Japan, Germany, Italy, Taiwan, countries where the manufacturing for the product is happening. Then those products shipped across the world to China, where the manufacturing of the iPhone actually happens. And so this being a global structure of a single product, right? So all these different countries working together to create a single product that is then controlled by a company that's based in the United States. And so while we're seeing the globalization of the construction of these products, the profits are being controlled in single parts of single companies in single parts of the world. So that's just one example of what globalization of capitalism looks like. Next slide, please. Neoliberalism goes hand in hand with globalization as a form of economic policies, but also political stances and ideological stances that go to enable the globalization of capitalism and exploitive neoliberal economic policies. So the idea that a lot of us are introduced to in talking about neoliberalism is this idea of free market capitalism. So ostensibly the idea of prosperity and freedom for all being behooved by free market capitalism. But in reality, we'll see that that's not at all the case, that free market capitalism really just serves a few people, the economic class, the capitalist class, and that it's really constructed of economic offensive toward workers. So privatization of industry, so any industry that was held by a nation or a collection of people becoming privatized and controlled by companies. Deregulation, so deregulation of environmental exploitive practices, tax cuts for companies, and commodification of everything. So any national resource all over the world gets commodified. At the same time of neoliberal economic policies, we're seeing political attacks on the labor movement, on unions, on national liberation struggles against imperialism. We're watching neoliberal policies squash those forms of resistance. And then we're also seeing an ideological shift toward individualism, toward consumerism, toward your worth is based off of what you consume in the world. This move away toward identifying as a collective of people. Next slide, please. So talking about what these policies, these neoliberal policies, global neoliberal policies, how they affect poor countries. We see immediately that small scale subsistence farmers or communities taking care of themselves that had been since time immemorial. We see their land get bought up by monocrop agricultural companies. We're seeing countries that were producing products largely for themselves, so self-sufficient economies where people were growing food for their own communities, suddenly get turned into export economies, where the goal is no longer, country's goal is no longer to take care of their own population, but suddenly becomes to compete in this global financial market. So instead of growing subsistence crops in northern Mexico, as an example, suddenly that becomes a special economic zone where companies are focused on exporting crops on a global market that has nothing to do with the rights of small farmers, but has everything to do with profit. And then as these land dispossessions are happening, we see there being a so-called surplus or army reserve of labor. And so we have all these people that had communities of people that had been living subsistence somewhere, who were able to take care of themselves on the land, suddenly being forced off the land. And then the companies that now control the land not needing that many workers. And so then we have this so-called surplus of workers that then have no options in their homeland and then are forced into migration, right? And so we see that starting in the 70s, where there's huge communities of people across the global South having to leave their home countries to find a life somewhere in the global North because of these neoliberal economic policies. Next slide, please. So we can see just some numbers here of what forced migration looks like, and they should just like kind of want to sit with them for 1 second because of how staggering they are. Specifically in 2010, that third point there, you see 132 million workers from the global South suddenly getting dispossessed and excluded from their local economies, and then getting forced to migrate to find a life for themselves, a life for their family, a life for their community somewhere outside of their home country. So really looking at these neoliberal policies as a huge cause of forced migration. Next slide, please. So neoliberal globalization also detrimentally affects working class people in the global North. So we see during this period in the 1970s and 1980s, a huge increase in unemployment, gutting of any sort of social safety net, so you have this population of people that previously had working class jobs, maybe had union support. Suddenly we see union busting, we see the exporting of jobs, and you have people who had been able to afford a life for their families, for themselves, suddenly being destitute in so-called the richest countries in the world. And with that becomes this huge increase in scapegoating of individuals, which often is people of color and migrants themselves. So we see that within the Trump era, right? This idea that migrants are the ones undermining the US economy, where in reality, it's these economic policies created by the financial elite that are actually putting the conflicts and the tensions of capitalism to affect working class people. Next slide, please. So if neoliberal globalization is so negatively impactful for everybody, why does it exist? And it's because of the benefits that it has for the capitalist elite or big businesses. So with a so-called surplus of labor, suddenly wages can be dropped. We see jobs getting exported to countries where workers' rights are a lot less, where the cost of labor is a lot less. So creating exploiting working conditions where people aren't compensated for their work. And then we'll also see the commodification of migration, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then we also see the working class get fragmented. So where there could be solidarity amongst working class people, suddenly we're seeing this fragmented class where we're dividing ourselves in our own minds around ethnicity, race, language, skills, country of origin. And then it becomes easier for us to get exploited by the capitalist class. Next slide, please. It's a lot to cover in 15 minutes. I appreciate y'all sitting with this. But I hope it breaks it down. I hope it breaks it down.
I think the next slide.
So just illustrating how the profiting of forced migration is a thing, like a phenomena that capitalism is taking advantage of, right? So we see labor recruitment agencies, private contractors, the cost of visas, the cost of transportation, legal services, money lenders, and then we're also seeing the control of migration by the capitalist class. So the militarization of borders, the so-called like legalization of who gets to work, who doesn't get to work. Next slide, please. I think it just goes down to the last 2 points. We see remittances. So when people have sending money back to their home countries, we see banks taking advantages of remittances, taking money away from people who are trying to send money back to their home countries. We see courier services and telecommunication, all these things that capitalism intervenes to profit off of for people who have been forced from their homelands to go work somewhere else in the world. So at every point that capitalism has manufactured this crisis, we're also seeing them profit off of the same crisis. Next slide, please. And so just the last 2 points I'll point out is how the state's role in this. So in countries of origin, we see states prioritizing profit off of exporting goods more than they're actually concerned about the well-being of their own people within their own borders. We see the monitoring and suppression of political activism. So to ensure that their countries of origin are cooperating with the global north, they'll suppress working people's movements in the global south. And then also this continued profiting off of remittances. So we see countries who whose governments prioritize profiting off of remittances that migrants are sending just to support their families back home. I think my last slide, please. And then destination countries or countries in the global north are also constructing this crisis to profit off of. So we're seeing the militarization of the borders, this control of workers' permits, and then the deportation for profit. The deportation for profit industry, so having migrants work as laborers in the global north when needed, only to get deported when the global north decides, okay, those laborers are no longer needed. So the expendability of migrants in the lens of the global north, and all of that being a for-profit system where organizations like Border Patrol or the DHS or just local policing even along the border gets funding to control migrant laborers as they try to enter. I think that's my last slide. I think maybe the review one more, and then I pass it back to you, Terry. So just to summarize, neoliberal globalization has only worsened the conditions for workers around the world, especially migrants. And then we watch this continued treatment of laborers and migrants as commodities to be shifted around, to be negotiated around. So just pointing out that none of these policies, that neoliberalism or free trade, has anything to do with us as people, as workers, as migrants, and has everything to do with profit. Pass back to you, Terry.
Thank you, Ben. So very condensed version of the discussion that we can do more in depth in the future. The last part is about the resistance. So if we go to the next slide, migrants are not taking this lying down. we are forced to leave our homelands and migrate all over the world, or building organizations, alliances, and resistance to neoliberal globalization and how it's impacting and exploiting migrants all over the world. If you go to the next slide, see these powerful images. So we've taken up various issues across the world. These are just some examples of the issues that we've taken up as IMA globally. And we just wanted to share a few of those with you all. Examples of our work on violence against migrants, trafficking, border restrictions, inhumane conditions. And the last one, especially during COVID, examples of demanding access to services and assistance whenever we need it, and we should have the rights to those. So just sharing some examples of the campaigns and issues we've taken up and released statements and coordinated actions across the world among migrants, groups, and organizations. We can go to the next slide. And so IMA in these campaigns has done things like promoting solidarity between IMA members in different countries to support each other's campaigns and build solidarity with other sectors. We gather international support for local struggles of migrants, and we raise local and national issues to the international and global stage. We call attention to global or international issues that affect migrants and refugees, and popularize our anti-imperialist analyses of these issues and struggles. We'll go to the next slide. The next few slides are examples of some of our campaigns, and we won't go into too much detail. But if we go to the next slide, there's examples of the campaigns for justice for Urwiana, Indonesian migrant in Hong Kong, and Mary Jane Veloso was a Filipino migrant in Indonesia, and the struggle of those two campaigns. I think it's on the next slide. All right, can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So actually, can we go to the next slide after that? I'm just highlighting a few. We have to kind of wrap up this part, but the engagement also of the UN and institutions like the Global Forum on Migration and Development, where they were really promoting send your people out of your home countries and you can develop by getting remittances like they do in the Philippines. And I think Narissa Roque will talk more about that, but basically confronting institutions like the United Nations, the Global Forum on Migration Development, and then also exposing the shortcomings of sort of depoliticized, this welfare-oriented advocacy of NGOs and migrant advocates that are not addressing the root causes of forced migration, which is our analysis as IMA. I can go to the next slide. Yeah, so these are just some of the images from New York, I think Mexico as well, of us confronting the UN and other global institutions. The next slide. This is I'll just drop the link in the next slide of a speech by our chairperson, Enila Stari, who will be coming to Seattle to join the protests against APEC. So in the next slide, you can see Ennie's speech. I'll put the link in the chat for her speech in front of the UN General Assembly. So that's Annie, just an image, and then I just put the link in the chat for her speech, where she emphasized for a long time others spoke on our behalf, now we speak for ourselves. Okay, we go to the next slide. Migrants must wage struggle for rights and welfare to improve our economic conditions, including things like higher wages and benefits, rights to essential services, and the right to organize. But migrants will always be abused and exploited for as long as their labor power is treated as commodities by capitalists, like we've talked about earlier. And there will be more migrants to exploit and abuse as long as the roots of forced migration in origin countries remain intact. Sorry Sorry, it's on the next slide, Adrian. Um, so yeah, sorry, I just read through this slide here. And then, yeah, we have to link and raise these economic struggles for rights and welfare to the political struggles for justice and liberation. So I think I have one more slide after this. You go to the next slide. We have to also struggle for justice and liberation against this global monopoly capitalist or imperialist system that's at the root of our problems. We have to delegitimize and oppose neoliberal policies, institutions like APEC, and unite with other exploited and oppressed people in origin countries against imperialism as the root of forced migration. We want to unite with working people in every country to end the global monopoly capitalist system and build a people's alternative. Migrants must wage these struggles together with other working class and oppressed people in destination countries, and especially in their countries of origin. Okay, and then the last slide kind of recaps this whole discussion. So problems faced by migrants, if you can go to the next slide, Adrian. Problems faced by migrants and refugees today are rooted in the capitalist system itself. Neoliberal globalization is an attempt to overcome the capitalist crisis of profitability that Ben talked about. It raises profits for monopoly capitalists, but worsens poverty, dispossession, and forced migration of working people. It raises profits for monopoly capitalists as a whole, and for specific capitalists who engage in the commercialization of migration. Governments promote neoliberal globalization and migration on behalf of monopoly capitalists and ruling elites in poor countries, and migrants must wage collective struggles in host countries and countries of origin to improve our economic welfare, strengthen our democratic rights, and build an alternative to this exploitative and destructive monopoly capitalist system. Yeah. So that's, sorry it took a while, but that's the preview to our longer educational discussion with Ima on how neoliberal globalization causes forced migration. I really wanted to hear from our speakers tonight. So now I want to introduce, if you go to the next slide, Nerissa Roque. Nerissa is Roque is a Filipino migrant caregiver living and working in Los Angeles, California. From her early days as a migrant worker in Fresno, California, Nerissa faced the repression of migrant caregivers by their employers, committing wage theft and retaliation against her. Nerissa led a campaign with her co-workers and PAWIS, it's an organization, in demanding to get their stolen wages and accountability for her former employer. In May 2022, Nerissa, her husband and youngest daughter, faced a violent racist attack in a local restaurant. Through the campaign Justice for the Roques, she became an organizer with Migrante Los Angeles, expanding on the issue of anti-Asian hate with forced migration and state neglect. So I want to turn it over and invite Nerissa Roque. Thank you for joining us tonight. I think she'll speak in Tagalog, so make sure you're in the proper channel, English language channel.
Yeah, hi everyone. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Terry, you can speak Tagalog, right? Hello? I just want to make sure that naririnig niyo ako.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Okay. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Terry, thank you for pagpapakilala mo sa akin. I-share ko lang yung experience ko bilang isang migrante. Nagpunta ako dito sa Amerika. Hindi dahil sa gusto ko, napilitan ako kasi para sa pamilya ko. Pero hindi ko inakala na itong bansang pinuntahan ko, ganito yung magiging trato sa akin at sa pamilya ko. Hindi mahirap, hindi madali kasi sino bang gustong umalis sa sariling bansa natin? Kaya lang, kadalasan wala tayong magawa dahil para sa pamilya natin, kailangan nating mabuhay para sa pamilya. But anyway, pagpunta ko nga dito, hindi ako tinrato ng maayos ng employer ko. Hindi ako pinasusweldo ng maayos. Hindi ako binibigyan ng day off. Hindi rin madaling makipaglaban. Pero sinabi ko sa sarili ko, kung walang magsasalita at walang tatayo, mano na tayo? So, kailangan nating magkaisa. At the same time, kailangan nating ipaalam sa mga taong gumagawa nito sa atin na hindi tayo dapat itratong iba. At the same time nga, naka-experience pa rin kami ng hindi maganda. Simpleng pamilya lang kami. Pero hindi ko akalaing dahil Asyano kami, gusto kaming patayin. So, pumunta lang kami ng anak ko sa fast food para bumili ng makakain. Hindi ko kilala tong taong to. Bigla na lang galit siya dahil Asyano daw kami ng anak ko at papatayin niya kami. Ganun pa man din, hindi ako pwedeng mag-share ng mahaba dahil ongoing pa yung kaso. Pero hopefully pag natapos to, hindi kami titigil ng pamilya ko until ma-share namin at the same time ma-share namin kung ano yung dinanas namin bilang isang migrante dito sa Amerika. Kaya nakikiusap ako sa inyong lahat na huwag natin kakalimutang magkaisa at tumulong sa kapwa natin, lalo na yung mga nangangailangan. Thank you.
Thank you, Tita Narissa. Is that I think that's the her sharing, but an example of the forced migration of Filipinos out of the Philippines coming to a host country or destination country like the US, and then not finding the economic opportunities and the repression, and then finding the racism, discrimination, and violence here in the host country. So it's very powerful sharing of the migrant struggles, the struggles that migrants and workers face all over the world in this current crisis. We want to move to our next speaker, which will be Manuel Hidalgo. We're very honored to have him here. He's a Peruvian migrant living and working in Chile, and he has been resisting neoliberalism and free trade throughout the Americas for decades now. He's an organizer with Miredes International. Miredes International organizes migrants, refugees, and displaced people throughout Latin America. And Manuel is also a member of the executive committee and international coordinating body of the International Migrants Alliance. So Manuel has prepared a talk for us, so I will turn it over now to Manuel.
Buenas noches. Agradezco a los compañeros de IMA, Estados Unidos, y a la de Pacífico Norte de People Over the Profits, la invitación. Primero hablaremos del desarrollo histórico del neoliberalismo en Chile. La última fase del sistema capitalista mundial se ha conocido como la globalización neoliberal. Su instalación a nivel planetario se procesó durante la década de los años 80 y su plenitud se alcanzó a principios de los años 90. Mediante la reestructuración que ella implicó en las instituciones internacionales y nacionales del orden económico, financiero y comercial, el bloque dominante a la cabeza del sistema mundo capitalista intentó superar la crisis estructural y sistémica que estalló a fines de los años 60 y que se expresó en una caída global de las tasas de ganancia del capital a nivel planetario a partir de entonces. La globalización neoliberal supuso la creciente hegemonía del capital financiero internacional, cuyos intereses ordenaron el conjunto del proceso a escala mundial. Supuso igualmente la derrota no solo del bloque de poder que antagonizó con el imperialismo estadounidense en el orden geopolítico mundial hasta fines de la década de los años 80 e inicios de los años 90, encabezado por la Unión de Repúblicas Socialistas Soviéticas, sino que entró en contradicción y lucha con todas las fuerzas que sostenían proyectos de acumulación continental, regional o nacional basados en un desarrollo industrial soberano a los que se propuso subordinar. Chile fue, sin embargo, una experiencia pionera en ese proceso. Ya a inicios de 1975, la dictadura militar puso término en forma drástica y rápida al modelo de acumulación basado en la industria nacional, liderado por el Estado, que se había mantenido desde la crisis mundial de los años 30. Empezaron entonces los 4 procesos básicos de la reforma neoliberal. Primero, el desplazamiento del Estado del rol motor y guía del crecimiento económico y la entronización del gran capital nacional y extranjero a la cabeza del proceso de acumulación. En otras palabras, la privatización y el Estado mínimo o subsidiario. 2. La apertura comercial y financiera de la economía, mediante la drástica reducción de los aranceles y de las restricciones para el libre flujo de capitales externos, lo que se traduce como internacionalización de la economía y la supeditación de la misma a los mercados mundiales, en los que imperan las empresas transnacionales y el gran capital financiero internacional. Tercero, la mercantilización de los sistemas de educación, salud y seguridad social, así como la desregulación y privatización de todo ámbito de la vida social y cultural. Y cuarto, la precarización y flexibilización del trabajo, eliminando todos los derechos colectivos
Yeah, so hopefully Manuel can join us again soon. Maybe some Wi-Fi difficulties in Chile. Thanks for everyone's patience. Maybe while we're waiting, I think then Narissa Roque wanted to share a little bit more, and then we can go back to Manuel. Is that okay, Narissa? And then the interpreters. Are you okay to
Yes,
share a little bit more?
yeah.
I think Narissa.
Just let me know if I can start now. Okay.
Sorry, we can't hear you, Narissa. I can hear you.
¿Pueden
Okay,
escucharme?
Oh,
Ya
okay.
estoy
I
de
think he's back.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, sorry. We'll
Disculpe.
continue with Manuel,
It's
and
okay.
then
Yeah.
we'll go back to you. Thank you.
Estaba diciendo que el cuarto pilar del neoliberalismo es la precarización y flexibilización del trabajo, eliminando todos los derechos colectivos del trabajo en la legislación y dando paso a nuevas formas de superexplotación del trabajo. Estos dos últimos procesos se pusieron en marcha a contar de 1983. En ese proceso, el neoliberalismo en Chile ha pasado por 4 etapas. Una primera de instalación, que duró de 1975 a 1982, fecha en que estalló la crisis financiera internacional, conocida como crisis de la deuda externa. El alza de las tasas de interés por la Reserva Federal de los Estados Unidos atrajo hacia su país los dólares de todos los países fuertemente endeudados hasta entonces y provocó una depreciación que sumió en la recesión y la insolvencia a todas las economías de América Latina y del este de Europa. En Chile, los grupos económicos del gran capital privado quebraron y su deuda fue asumida por el Estado a cambio de entregar al capital transnacional las mayores empresas del país. Una segunda etapa empezó entonces, en 1983 y hasta 1989, en los que se entronizó directamente el capital transnacional a la cabeza del sistema de dominación y del modelo de acumulación en una reformulación y ampliación de sus lineamientos. La tercera etapa se inició con la vuelta de la democracia formal al término de dictadura, en 1990, y se prolongó hasta el año 2011. Fue la etapa de la consolidación del modelo neoliberal, en la que se profundizaron todos los pilares del mismo, con una profunda penetración del capital extranjero en todo el aparato productivo y de servicios, en particular en las actividades con potencial exportador, como la minería, la pesca, la fruticultura, así como los servicios modernos de las finanzas, la energía, las telecomunicaciones, la infraestructura. En esta etapa tuvieron singular importancia, a partir de fines de los años 90, la suscripción de numerosos acuerdos internacionales en materia económica con distintos alcances, acuerdos de asociación estratégica, tratados de libre comercio, acuerdos de complementación económica y acuerdos de alcance parcial. Los más importantes son los tratados de libre comercio, partiendo por los suscritos con Estados Unidos, la Unión Europea y China. La última etapa del neoliberalismo en Chile está marcada por la crisis del sistema de dominación y del modelo de acumulación, que partió en 2011, que si bien está condicionada y relacionada con la crisis de la globalización neoliberal a nivel mundial y la pérdida de dinamismo tanto del comercio como de la inversión a nivel planetario, también está determinada por la creciente pérdida de hegemonía ideológica y política de las clases dominantes y la emergencia de una creciente resistencia y movilización de sectores populares contra el neoliberalismo, que persiste hasta el presente. Segunda parte, globalización neoliberal, tratados de libre comercio y flujos migratorios en América Latina y el Caribe en los últimos 25 años. La imposición de las reformas neoliberales en América Latina y el Caribe cobró fuerza a inicios de los años 90. Instrumento de ese proceso fueron los tratados de libre comercio, como el NAFTA y luego los TLC de Estados Unidos con Chile, Colombia, Perú, Centroamérica y República Dominicana, entre otros. Esos procesos de apertura comercial y financiera provocaron la crisis de la agricultura tradicional y campesina de los países latinoamericanos y el desmantelamiento de buena parte de su industria nacional, instalando en su lugar maquilas en México y Centroamérica y una superespecialización de las economías en actividades exportadoras de materias primas y alimentos. Al mismo tiempo, estos procesos fueron acompañados de una fuerte concentración de los ingresos y beneficios del crecimiento económico en el gran capital y los actores vinculados a las actividades financieras y a los negocios de exportación, con una reducción al mismo tiempo de los servicios y del empleo público. Todo ello provocó una importante dinamización de la emigración de trabajadores latinoamericanos y caribeños hacia las economías del norte desarrollado, desde mediados de los años 90 en adelante, en particular hacia los Estados Unidos y hacia España e Italia en el caso de Europa. El proceso de inserción internacional de Chile, más temprano que el resto de los países de América Latina, y su amplia integración al capital financiero internacional mediante los tratados de libre comercio, le significaron un rápido y sostenido crecimiento durante los años previos a la crisis de 2011 en adelante, lo que atrajo a trabajadores inmigrantes de los países vecinos desde fines de los años 90 en adelante. Las políticas más restrictivas de Estados Unidos y de la Unión Europea, luego de 2001 y 2006, respectivamente, en relación a la migración, provocaron una parcial reorientación de los flujos migratorios de América Latina y el Caribe hacia países del propio continente, hacia Argentina, Brasil y Chile en particular. Luego de 2013, esos flujos migratorios empezaron a reflejar ya no solo el impacto de las políticas económicas neoliberales, sino que de las acciones políticas y militares de Estados Unidos por recuperar un grado de control sobre la evolución política de América Latina y el Caribe, continente al que siempre ha considerado su patio trasero, y en particular de Mesoamérica y el Caribe, que constituyen su zona de seguridad nacional inmediata. En los siguientes 10 años, la disputa política se intensificó en todo el continente en medio de un constante agravamiento de la crisis económica y política de orden internacional. En América Latina, en 2018 y 2019, éxodos migratorios y rebeliones populares resultaron del impacto de la crisis sistémica y de la intervención estadounidense en las condiciones de sobrevida de los pueblos y del reiterado intento de descargar los costos de la crisis en ellos. La continuidad y agravamiento de la crisis del capitalismo mundial, que lleva ya más de una década, luego de los episodios de la pandemia de 2020 y 2021, la guerra de la OTAN contra Rusia en territorio de Ucrania a partir de febrero de 2022, así como las políticas de los bancos centrales del capitalismo central en 2022 y 2023 para contener la inflación nacida de los hechos anteriores, ha tenido un impacto demoledor en los países de América Latina y el Caribe. La pandemia provocó en las economías y los mercados laborales de América Latina y el Caribe una crisis sin precedentes. En 2020 se tuvo la peor contracción económica en las últimas 7 décadas y pese a la recuperación observada en 2021, Naciones Unidas estima que entre 2014 y 2023 América Latina crecería 0,8% anual, es decir, menos de la mitad del crecimiento registrado en la llamada década perdida de 1980 a 1989. La crisis económica ha disminuido además no solo el empleo de los trabajadores, sino también la capacidad adquisitiva de los salarios, que han experimentado una caída continuada en los últimos 18 meses. Si esta es la situación de los trabajadores en general, la peor parte se la han llevado los trabajadores migrantes. El desempleo y la informalidad creciente de los empleos, la caída de los salarios reales, la persecución policial al comercio ambulante, el racismo que sigue cobrando víctimas en la población afrodescendiente y de las disidencias sexuales, la incesante criminalización de la migración irregular, las presiones hacia las autoridades políticas y migratorias para que reincidan en una política anti-inmigrante que multiplique y agilice las expulsiones y militarice las fronteras. Son parte de lo que nos toca vivir en estos momentos. Se suma a esto una extendida crisis de seguridad pública favorecida por las políticas neoliberales y las políticas restrictivas de la migración, que han creado el espacio para el enriquecimiento y transnacionalización de las mafias traficantes de personas y de trata sexual y laboral. Estas, que ya tenían una presencia muy visible en México, El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Colombia y Venezuela, se han expandido ahora a toda la subregión sudamericana. Paradojalmente, las mismas fuerzas anti-inmigrantes que crearon esta situación culpan hoy a la inmigración irregular de la explosión del crimen organizado que hoy afecta a toda la región. No debe extrañarnos que las clases dominantes, agotada su capacidad de cooptar y someter por el consumismo y el endeudamiento a la sociedad, avancen resueltamente a instalar una sociedad del miedo y que conviertan a las víctimas de sus políticas, como somos las personas migrantes, en chivos expiatorios de las crisis que ellas han causado. Tercero y última parte, la resistencia al neoliberalismo, a sus instrumentos como los TLC y la APEC. A fines de los años 90, en diversos países de América Latina y el Caribe, en particular en Sudamérica, se iniciaron procesos de cambio a partir del fortalecimiento de la resistencia a la globalización neoliberal, que se extendió y acrecentó en casi todos los países, exceptuados Chile, Colombia, Paraguay y Perú, al calor de la cual empezaron a germinar prácticas y organizaciones de nuevos movimientos sociales y populares en proceso de constitución, que levantaban progresivamente los elementos de una salida alternativa a las crisis nacionales y de la región. Diversos procesos empezaron entonces a abrir el horizonte de oportunidad de avanzar hacia una América Latina libre y soberana, Con la emergencia de las nuevas potencias asiáticas, se empezó a verificar un proceso de cambio de la articulación económica de los países de la región dentro del sistema capitalista internacional que no se detiene hasta ahora. Hoy, China es el principal socio comercial de Argentina, Brasil, Chile, Perú, Uruguay y el segundo de México y Colombia. En la primera década del nuevo siglo, Brasil emergió como potencia regional latinoamericana, disputando la hegemonía de la integración continental y como integrante del BRICS en el plano geopolítico mundial. Surgieron inéditos espacios de integración latinoamericana al margen de la influencia e injerencia estadounidense: el ALBA, UNASUR y CELAC. En el trasfondo, se extendió la resistencia de los pueblos indígenas y de movimientos sociales en América Latina contra el neoliberalismo, transformándose en numerosos países en actores protagónicos de la escena política. Como un reflejo de eso, se produjo el llamado ciclo de gobiernos progresistas, con gobiernos bolivarianos y neodesarrollistas, que se consolidaron a lo largo de la década 2002 a 2012. El desplazamiento de las fuerzas políticas administradoras del neoliberalismo se produjo junto con una crisis cada vez más profunda de los viejos sistemas de partidos políticos. Es en ese contexto que a partir de encuentros regionales de organizaciones migrantes latinoamericanas que unieron sus voces para hacerse oír por Naciones Unidas en el primer diálogo de alto nivel sobre migración y desarrollo en 2005-2006, que surge Mi Redes Internacional, reclamando el derecho a hablar con voz propia, y que en los años siguientes y hasta 2018 buscó empujar la articulación de los movimientos de migrantes y refugiados en los espacios del Foro Social Mundial de Migraciones, sin encontrar mayor eco en las organizaciones no gubernamentales que controlan mayoritariamente esa instancia. Por lo que nuestra incorporación a IMA en noviembre de 2018 marcó un salto de calidad en nuestra articulación al encontrarnos con organizaciones de hermanas y hermanos de migrantes y refugiados de todo el mundo, que comparten nuestra convicción de asumir protagónicamente la defensa de nuestros derechos y que señalan sin miedo que es el capitalismo y el imperialismo estadounidense, que son el capital financiero internacional y las empresas transnacionales, que son sus instrumentos como los tratados de libre comercio y los foros como la APEC, que propagandizan e instrumentan sus políticas, los culpables de las crisis que nos han forzado a migrar. Son ellos que han mercantilizado el trabajo humano y toda la vida del planeta y que nos tienen al borde de un abismo de muerte y destrucción. Es hora de unirnos en IMA y con los trabajadores y pueblos del mundo para acabar con la globalización neoliberal, con el capitalismo y el imperialismo, con los TLC y con la APEC. Muchas gracias, compañeras y compañeros.
Thank you so much, Manuel. Very comprehensive look at how neoliberal globalization and forced migration has developed from Peru, Chile, and throughout Latin America. We have his paper that he shared with us in English and Spanish, so we can share that with you all if you would like a copy. But we also want to thank also Narissa Roque. I think you had a few more comments you wanted to share, and then we're going to go into discussion groups. There's going to be one in person in Portland and one in person in Seattle, and then we'll stay online to have further discussion for the last part of the webinar. But I wanted to ask Tita Narissa Roque if you had any additional comments, final comments you wanted to make. Thank you both for speaking tonight.
maikli lang yung yung i-share ko na
Still here with
idadagdag ko.
us.
Oh, yeah. You can, everybody
Not
can hear
seeing
me?
her here. Okay. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, i-share ko
Okay,
lang.
Marissa, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. You can hear me? Hello?
Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. I-share ko lang yung na-experience ko regarding sa konsulada, sa Philippine Consulate, na isa rin sa mga gusto kong i-share to dahil unang-una ayokong danasin ng hindi man kapwa nating Pilipino, pero kahit anumang lahi, hindi dapat tinatrato ang para sa akin ng ganito ang isang mamamayan. So, dahil nga sa nangyari sa akin, ang nangyari sa pamilya ko, about dito sa hate crime, humihingi kami bilang isang mamamayang Pilipino, humihingi kami ng tulong sa Philippine Consulate na after mahigit 1 taon, doon lang sila, kung hindi pa sila kinatok ng isang kapwa nating taga-community, hindi pa nila kami pagbibigyan na makausap. Hindi man lang kami, halos maraming nakakaalam sa insidenteng nangyari sa amin. Pero hanggang ngayon, ang dalawang gobyernong inaasahan ko na at least tutulungan kami, wala. Hindi kami, kahit 5, wala silang pinagbabalik-balikan kami, pinapipilap kami ng mga form na hanggang ngayon, pinilap naman namin lahat ng mga process na hinihingi, sinabit namin, pero up to now, hindi pa kami binibigyan ng tulong. Ang tumutulong lang sa amin na talagang masasabi kong sa experience ko, pagdating ng kagipitan, hindi man kagipitan, basta kailangan natin ng tulong, ang community, lagi silang nandyan. In my own experience up to now, and I know for future, hindi man sa akin, sa mga kapwa nating iba pang nandyan, tutulong at tutulong sila. So, ang Philippine Consulate, na dapat tutulong sa akin at sa pamilya ko, hindi, wala pa kaming tulong na nahihingi sa kanila. And isang beses meron kaming meeting, humingi kami ng meeting kay Mr. Badajos, kay Consul General. Pinaunlakan kami yung meeting na yon, pero imbis na tulungan kami, nag-invite pa sila ng taga-PNP na hindi namin invited, na hindi namin alam na bakit nandun. So, ang akin, anong plano nila? Biktima kami. Humihingi kami ng tulong. Wala kaming balak manggulo. Nandun kami para humingi ng tulong, pero ganun yung ginawa sa akin at sa pamilya. So, kaya ang akin lang hindi madali para sa akin at para sa pamilya ko na para i-expose tong mga ganitong bagay. Pero kailangan para malaman ng ayoko nang ma-experience ng iba. Kaya para sa akin talagang napaka-importanting i-share ko tong bagay na to, kasi yung gobyernong inaasahan ko na tutulong sa amin at sa pamilya ko, hindi pala. At sila rin ang punot dulo na kung maayos ang pamamalakad sa Pilipinas, may sapat na trabaho, walang aalis sa Pilipinas Walang mangingibang bansa para manilbihan sa
sa katulad nga nito sa Amerika. So, yun lang. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narissa Roque. Again, a powerful sharing. And migrants, workers organizing themselves. I think actually, I think Narissa's actually at work right now, but joined our webinar tonight to help us build the resistance from the Philippines to Los Angeles, from Peru to Chile, and all over the world. So thank you both, Narissa Roque and Manuel Hidalgo, for sharing tonight. We just have a few more comments and then we'll go into our discussion groups. We want you all to join us in IMA. We can join the full educational discussion, the 6-hour version of the ED where we go in depth on all of these issues and build a powerful grassroots migrants movement all over the world. The next slide, we just have a few points where we want you to join IMA. Here's the membership interest form. And then maybe you can also put it in the chat and then sign up if you're interested in the full educational workshop on neoliberal globalization and forced migration. Annie Lestari, the chairperson, will be doing it with us here in Seattle later this month. And we can also share it with you in the future. And then lastly, we want you all to join us at the mobilizations. IMA will have a migrants contingent at the mobilizations against APEC in Seattle, July 29th and 30th, and against the APEC when it comes here, where I am in San Francisco, November 10th, 11th, where the heads of state, AMLO from Mexico, President Biden will be here, Bongbong Marcos from the Philippines will be here. So join those actions in Seattle and San Francisco. Thank you all for staying with us through the presentations, the powerful speakers. Thank you again to Narissa Roque and Manuel Hidalgo for joining us. We're going to move now into discussion groups where we can talk more. If you have questions, we can raise those there. We want to talk about what do we do with the information that was shared tonight? How do we build the grassroots migrants movement and the people's struggles against APEC? So again, there will be a discussion group in Portland in person, in Seattle, and then the rest of us can stay here online if you're not in those areas in person. But thank you all again to all of the speakers. We want to thank the interpreters who hopefully can stay on with us for the online discussion for the last half hour until 7:30. But Manuel, if you can stay, I think Narissa, if you can stay with us, that would be great. I'm sure folks have a lot of questions for you all. For those going to the in-person meeting, have a good discussion there. And then I'll pass it to Henry, who will help us facilitate the last portion online until 7:30.
Hi, so just to clarify, I thought we were breaking into 2 groups with one Spanish and one English, or are we gonna stick with one group?
For this last part online, let's see, how do we do this? It might be, I think, easier if we just stay together, and then we still have our interpreters. We are in our language channels, so we can have a group discussion here in the 3 rooms.
Okay, so we can stay like this. So if everyone is ready, we're just going to go into having our discussion. So just a reminder to everyone as people are going to chime into this discussion, since we are still going to be getting support from our awesome interpreters, let's just remember to do our best to not speak too quickly so that they're going to have time to continue with the interpretation. Yeah, really want to open it up for everyone to have a space to discuss all of the content that we've gone over. We've gone over a number of presentations on neoliberal globalization, as well as some specific points on Latin America and from Manuel, and as well as some important experiences from Nerissa that also relate to neoliberal globalization. So really open floor for anyone to share. What are your key takeaways that are standing out right now? So feel free to unmic, or if you want to raise your hand, you're welcome to do that.
I can share.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Henry. I think for me, one of the things that stands out when we talk about like APEC and IPEF and NAFTA is just the repetition of these types of policies around the world. So that stands out to me, of just thinking that like they are using a very specific set of tools and strategies, and there's some predictability with it. And I feel like the tools and strategies to stop those policies is something that we're sharpening. And I believe in the struggle. I feel like they just keep doing the same things over and over again in different countries, in different versions, but it's the same things. And so I feel like we can definitely build a movement to counter that because of that, like just repetition and like seeing it again and again.
Yes, thank you for sharing that point. And I think that really highlights the importance of educational opportunities like this to really understand these strategies that they keep on using, because we are also not the first people that have fought against them as well. And we have a lot to learn from each other. Thank you for that, Cass. Would anyone else like to share? Maybe someone from California, if anyone from California is on our call.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I found this very interesting, and it's really inspiring to know that people all over the world are fighting against the same capitalist imperialist system. I think it's important to know that the uprising in France was against the same racist system as the uprisings in Latin America and all around the world. The thing is that I don't think that there's any good or lesser evil imperialists or capitalists. I think we gotta bite the bullet and see that they're all the enemy of the working class, whether it's the US imperialists who are on the decline, or whether it's the upcoming and rising Chinese imperialists, which have right now the biggest Navy and Army in the world. They're all the enemy of the working class, and we need to fight for our interests. Our interests are the opposite of all of their interests. And there's no rule, there's no order that can make their trade system fair to the working class. We need a different system. We need a real communist system where we all produce to meet the needs of everyone. We don't need money, we don't need banks, we don't need NAFTA or BRICS or any of them. We need workers having ties with each other and building a society that meets our needs. So that's real communism. That's what I think we need. And all these heroic movements around the world need to recruit people to fight for real communism.
Great, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts here, Barbara, and definitely pointing to the complexity of the situation, and that we shouldn't just be only focusing on US imperialism, even if it's the primary imperialist power in the world today. And we should also really think through what are some solutions, ultimate solutions to the problems of imperialism that can bring about liberation for people.
I just wanted to add one thing. Thank you. I just wanted to add one other thing. Well, I first of all, it's really in debate. Está en juego who the main imperialists are. I mean, that's what they're fighting over. And unfortunately, that fight is leading to a world war. And we really need to mobilize for a different system, because none of these imperialists care about us. They're all willing to sacrifice our lives for their profits. I'm going to put the website of International Communist Workers Party in the chat if anybody would be interested in talking more or reading our paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I think we have time for a few more comments here. If anyone else is interested to share, we'd really like to hear some other people's thoughts here. If anyone wants to share their initial thoughts, you're welcome to. But I also want to pose another question here. If these discussions today have made you think of any groups that you work with on the ground in your local areas that you might want to involve in our campaign against APEC, that we could really make links with, especially using this analysis of neoliberal globalization. Are there any organizations, maybe people can also just throw out in the chat, are there any organizations that you all are working with on the ground, that you're collaborating with, just any and all organizations? Maybe just throw out in the chat. Anyone who isn't already involved in this coalition. Super Familia, shout out Super Familia. I've joined a couple of these webinars in the past. Any other organizations? Capybara, lots of love for Capybara Colectiva. We have some representatives of Capybara working here locally. Okay, we have a couple others. Migrante Los Angeles, Anaquan San Fernando Valley on workers' campaigns. Familias Unidas por la Justicia, Not sure if they have joined or maybe they are on this call. Haven't looked through all of the participants. But I appreciate you sharing these awesome organizations, and I'm sure these are some great groups that we could collaborate with and involve them in this campaign if they're not already involved. So I want to go on to another question that how do you think that we can use the analysis that we have studied today, especially as we are organizing towards these major protests against APEC in November in San Francisco? So I actually want to pose this question to Manuel, if you're interested. Do you have any response to this thought of how could the analysis that we've studied today really contribute to our protests against APEC in November?
Gracias por la pregunta. Lo que estudiamos hoy nos enseña a las personas migrantes que no fue una causa de solamente del país de origen lo que nos empujó a migrar. Aprendimos que nuestros países están bajo la presión de una economía mundial, de fuerzas mundiales, el capitalismo y las fuerzas que controlan el capitalismo no son de carácter local, son fuerzas internacionales. La globalización neoliberal es un sistema mundial, es un sistema empujado por el imperialismo, encabezado por el imperialismo estadounidense, pero que confluyen las fuerzas del capital de todos los países capitalistas, del sistema capitalista mundial. Y ese sistema empobrece a algunos países más que a otros y empobrece dentro de cada país a los trabajadores y a los sectores más oprimidos. Entonces, ¿qué aprendemos los migrantes? Que nuestras necesidades, nuestros derechos, solo podemos defenderlos. Primero, si nos unimos con otras personas que como nosotros han migrado. Solo si no hay unidad, el migrante, la persona migrante cuando está sola, sufrirá mucho, será una tragedia para él y para ella, su migración. Tiene que unirse, tiene que organizarse, tiene que unirse y organizarse con otros migrantes, con otros sectores trabajadores en el barrio en que vive, en el lugar en que trabaja, en el lugar en que estudia. Tiene que unirse, tiene que organizarse. Y solo unidos y organizados podemos enfrentar al capitalismo, a los causantes de la explotación y la discriminación en todo el mundo. Aprendimos que nuestra defensa de nuestros derechos solo lo podemos lograr si nos organizamos, y una vez que estamos organizados, si conocemos bien el enemigo. Y nuestros enemigos no son solamente el patrón directo que nos explota, es el sistema capitalista, es el imperialismo. Eso, compañeros.
Así es. Thank you, Manuel, for your response there. Really appreciate you sharing more of your analysis on how we can really use this study towards uniting people in a fight against capitalism and against neoliberal globalization, against APEC. I want to also pose a question to our other speaker, Narissa, and I want to ask, are there any concrete ways that people on this call tonight could support your campaign, if you can speak at all to that.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear.
Oh, hi. Pwedeng i-authorize kong magsalita in my behalf si Viva kasi isa siya sa mga nag-organize and tumutulong. Isa siya sa mga organizer and community member as well na tumutulong sa regarding for Justice for the Roque. So at least may explain niya ng maayos. Are you there, Viva?
Yeah, I can share. Thank you, Tita.
Okay, Viva, I guess we'll just have to switch off of interpretation for a moment in order to do that. Oh, I guess it's already switched. Sorry, go ahead, Viva.
Yeah, it's all good. And thank you, Tita. Just for context for everyone here, Tita Nerissa took the time during work as a caregiver to join us on this ED. So I think that I just want to share my appreciation to Tita. But in order to support the Justice for the Roques campaign, I think what's important for us to understand is that there are really two aspects of the campaign. One is tackling and exposing the legal system here in the US that treats migrants like this, who keeps calling them back to the courtroom day in and day out without any consideration that they are losing wages. And the other aspect is seeing the role of the Philippine government and how they treat migrants, how they treat the people who are treating as commodities when they move abroad, and how they don't give the proper resources, they don't give the services allocated to them. So those are the two main things that's going on in the campaign. And I think one big way for us to support the campaign is to we created a documentary called Liwanag or Light, which showcases the experience of three frontline workers during the pandemic and highlights how neoliberalism, how privatization really affected migrant workers. So this, I think for the campaign, we want more people to know about it so that they can also have the strength to speak up on their issues and inspire them to also speak up on their issues. The other aspect is for people to mobilize their local People's State of the Nation address mobilization. So at Philippine consulates where the Roque family is actually going to be calling on the consulate on why is it that the attention to national services or aid that's specifically allocated to migrants, migrant Filipinos abroad are annually and underutilized, and also asking why is it that when migrant workers asked to meet with them, they were met with surveillance by the Philippine National Police and have the capacity to fund personnel there, but no capacity to help working class migrant workers here in the US. So the collective confrontation of the Philippine state will also be important so that they understand that it's not just this one family being affected by state negligence. It's migrants all throughout the US and even globally being affected by their negligence. And then PJ posted in the chat some links for us to learn more and support the campaign.
Thank you very much for your additions there on how we can support the campaign, Justice for the Roques, and please follow these links so that we can all really learn more about this struggle and continue to support in the ways that we can. I think I really appreciate everyone's additions on these questions. Thank you, Tita Marissa, for your comments here, and thank you, Viva, for adding. Do we have time for maybe one more question, or are we coming up on time here?
Yeah, maybe one last comment or question. We're going to 7:30. A few more minutes.
All right. Maybe one more question is maybe people can just respond in the chat here. In general, do people feel like we have a stronger understanding of why we need to oppose APEC and the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework now that we have this deeper understanding of neoliberal globalization and its impacts on different communities around the world? Do people feel like we have a stronger understanding of why it's important to oppose APEC and IPEC? Any responses there? You can use the chat, you can unmic. We have an answer yes and no. APEC is in the Asia Pacific now, but in Latin America next. What is happening there will be happening all over the world, and we will see worsening conditions for migrants and workers everywhere. Any other thoughts, closing thoughts as we have our last couple minutes here?
Yeah, just on that point, Genesis, thank you for sharing that. So we particularly invited Manuel tonight because in APEC, because it's Asia Pacific, Chile is a member of APEC, Peru, and Mexico. So AMLO will be here from Mexico, and the heads of state of Chile and Peru will also be here. So we hope to build, from Latin America, Asia Pacific, United States, etc., a powerful movement against APEC. So, but thank you for that comment. And we still have the other free trade agreements, USMCA and others to oppose as well. But it's great to be in solidarity with all of you across the region.
Yes, thank you for that, Terry. And just reading some of these last couple of comments. Yes, and the more we wage this campaign on the ground, the more we learn about how much this impacts people's everyday lives while keeping what it is about so obscured from us. Yes, that's very important. They try to make it confusing and boring so people don't understand what's going on, but we're trying to really get to the bottom of it. And we see here from Jim, solidarity with you in the struggle versus APEC, Jim, for Workers' World Party. So I think with that, we can close out, and I can hand back to Terry to close us out here. So I really appreciate everyone's contributions to really enrich our discussion today and make the most of this international multilingual discussion on these important issues that really affect all of our lives.
Great, thank you, everyone. I think we're closing here. Thank you again to Narissa Roque, Manuel Hidalgo. Thank you to all the interpreters for the powerful work tonight to have a trilingual first time. We had 3 languages simultaneously, all of the tech support. Let's continue to build the coalition, the campaign against APEC, and the people's movement and struggles. Join IMA, join the No to APEC coalition, and hope to see you in Seattle and San Francisco in November. Good night, everyone. Folks, interpreters, speakers, tech, you want to stay on, we'll just debrief a little bit. But thank you all for joining us tonight. Very powerful gathering of 70+ people